Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Wendigo horror stories. First story, Wendigo, the Encounter. So I don't really know how to start this, so I'm just going to spew out some stuff and hope it all makes sense because it sure as hell doesn't to me. Have any of you even encountered one before? If not, let me tell these things are not like how Google or any of pictures you find depicts them, at least not right away. Let's get into it. I'm from Canada, and I live on a reserve that's about 30 minutes from any town relatively close compared to other places I've been. Well, it's the end of December, and just getting finished with holidays and spending it relatively alone, thanks COVID. I get a call from one of my friends. He wants to go hunting. Well, that's kind of a problem because I've never shot a gun or went hunting before. Pretty pathetic for a Native American if you ask me. But anyways, he tells me he just needs my eyes and another set of legs to help carry whatever he catches. So I agree, making one of the biggest mistakes I would come to regret. So he picks me up in his crappy old Ford truck he uses for hunting, tells me we're going deep into the bush, and we'll find a spot to camp along the way. So we drive about 20 minutes into the woods, following what little road is left, and we get to a point where we have to continue on foot. We unload our gear and supplies, and carry until we find a nice clearing with room for everything after we set up camp, we begin our trek into the woods going farther than I had gone before. Saw a couple of bucks and rabbits, nothing too spectacular. So we keep looking cause he wants the big daddy buck, and we come to this other clearing much larger than the one we are camping at, and something about this part of the woods just feels off. It had a heavy feeling to like the air was thick, and just a disorienting aura about this place. But we hadn't caught anything yet, and we're getting hungry, so we spot a rabbit in the middle of this clearing. Buddy lines up the shot, and BM, we have dinner. So being the one without the gun, I go to get our little dinner in the middle of this clearing, and I notice something odd, that it's a perfect circle, no tree stumps, no sign that any human had made this gigantic circle. I also happen to notice what look like claw marks on the trees surrounding the area. Buddy said it's from bears sharpening claws and marking territory, but the marks were so deep into the trees, it seemed off. Anyways, it's dark out now, and we are back at our campsite eating and talking about how crazy this pandemic shit is. I also brought up the clearing we were at and how weird it felt to me. I wanted to know if he felt like that too, or if I was just exaggerating. My anxiety makes me do that sometimes. To which he said, yeah. He noticed a change in the air too, and said it made him feel dizzy and worn out, but he also said it just could have been from the long day we had. So on that note, it was time for bed. We both slept in same tent. It's the middle of winter, and bundling up can only do so much, plus he was like a brother to me. It had to be around 1 a.m. when we both woke up to sound of the most horrible scream I'd ever heard. What was that? Was my first, though. I'm guessing my friend was thinking the thing as he looked at me with fear on his face. I know because I was afraid too. So he grabs his gun, loads a round into the thing, and we just sit there for a while and listen. Now I know my friend is at least safe, he's got a gun, but I have nothing. Fear and my anxiety start getting the better of me. So I ask, where's the hatchet we use to split wood? Out there by the fire, he said so. I tell him when I open the tent, grab the hatch, and when I jump in, you seal the thing back up. I open the tent, and as fast as I can bolt to grab that hatchet. As I go to turn around with hatchet in hand, I'm quickly greeted by my friend shoving me down by the back of my neck. He put his finger up to his mouth to tell me to be quiet, and we listen. In the distance, I can hear the slow sound of crunching snow and a faint, high-pitched guttural growl. Now I'm in full panic mode. We don't even have to say anything to each cause we both know our hunting trip was over, and it was time to leave. All we had to do was make it to the truck in the dead of night. It sounded so easy. But it wasn't, and I knew it from the moment I heard, I'm going to fire a warning shot. Before I could even open my mouth to tell him no, it was too late. The shot rang in the distance, and for a moment there was silence. Then we heard a scream so soul-piercing it felt like it lasted forever. It definitely echoed and lingered much more than this gunshot did. It was petrifying. I never heard such a haunting scream before that I was literally frozen in fear. Then we could hear whatever made this scream was charging right for us with the sound of crunching snow getting closer and closer. We looked at each other and just ran in the direction of the truck. frantically sprinting, calling out to each other to make sure the other hadn't fallen behind. We're almost there, we kept telling each other as we were weaving through trees, making a beeline to the truck. Try to ignore the sound of this growl that sounds like it's right in my ear, but I can see the truck, we're going to make it, we're getting out of here. As we come up to the truck, my friend makes it to his side and unlocks both passenger and driver side at the same time. As I open the door, he does so at the same time, and then he's gone in a flash of white. This thing had gotten him, ran at him with such force that when it tackled him, it shook the truck side to side. I stood there in shock. I call out to him, but all I can hear are screams and a couple gunshots, and then dead silence again. I know in my heart that my friend is dead, and so am I. If I don't get out of here, I go over to the driver's side and find the keys on the ground. He must have let them go when he got tackled. I hop and start the damn thing, whip it around in the direction I needed to get out of here. Then I saw it. Skin as white as snow, completely hairless. Eyes that had sunken into its head made dark circles around eyes that were just as white as its skin. No nose, teeth so jagged and sharp shine with the color of blood, and its lips looked like they had been chewed off, so all you're staring at is teeth. Its body was so disproportioned, long, lanky limbs. This thing is blocking me from leaving, but I'm getting out of here no matter what. I floor it with the tires spinning. I shoot forward, and so does it, screaming that blood-curdling scream as it charges at me. Now I'm getting up close and personal as this thing lunges at the truck and bounces of the hood and over top of the truck. As I'm speeding away, I glance at the rearview mirror and witness this thing get up and just stand there watching me drive off with its head tilted slightly. I knew I had just escaped death with the price of losing my friend. Second story. My experience with the Slender Man, or, as I later found out, the Wendigo. I was 13 years old when this happened. It took place in a small town in northern British Columbia, Canada. I was out for an afternoon horse ride with my horse, Duke. He's a well-trained horse and doesn't spook easily. We were riding down an isolated path all alone, about 30 minutes away from my house, or any kind of building for that matter. It was surrounded by dark, thick forest. We were going up a hill when I saw a dark, shadowy figure emerge from the woods. I walked to the middle of the trail and stopped, turned towards my horse, and I just stared at us. It was at least 8 feet tall with long legs. Its disgusting, bony arms hung down to its knees. The way it walked can be described as the way the nurses walked in the Silent Hill movie. It walked with its limbs twisted and knees bent. I didn't get a good look at it, as I only saw it for a couple seconds before I ordered my horse to turn around and run as fast as we could. I went home and told my friend. When I described what it looked like, her face went pale with fear. She said that she had seen the same creature before, about 6 months ago. We decided to do a little research on it. We found almost nothing on the internet, so we decided to go to the local library. We asked the librarian, and she pointed out a book on Native American myths and legends. We checked out and found a near-perfect description of what we had both seen. Apparently in Aboriginal myths, it is known as the Wendigo. I apologize for the poor writing and format, as I'm only 15 years old. Third story. I found a journal deep in the woods of Superior National Forest. I've been what some may call a wilderness expert for almost 2 decades now. I plan my trips to various forests very carefully to ensure I make it out alive. I bring all the supplies necessary to survive for a couple of weeks in case I get lost, and I also bring a satellite phone, GPS, and a weapon as a last resort. Sometimes getting lost in the woods is part of the fun, as long as you know what you're doing, that is. The story I'm sharing with you today is of a young man who didn't take all the precautions I would recommend for a journey into an unknown forest. On my most recent expedition to Superior National Forest in Minnesota, I came upon a journal hanging from a tree. There are only a few pages left in the journal. All the rest were torn out to be used for kindling as the writer addresses in the journal. The contents of this journal are very strange, and I'll touch on that later. But without further ado, my name is Anthony Lawrence. I'm a student of Bemidji State University. I don't know what the exact date is, but I first came out here on August 3rd, 2017. I think it's been about 2 weeks now. If you find this journal, you can stop looking for me. I don't have much paper left in this journal, so I'll have to try and keep this short. About a week before coming out here, I got a message on Facebook from some guy saying he's looking for healthy young adventurers who want to earn some money. He said he'd give me $1,000 to spend 48 hours in the woods, using whatever resources I came across to stay alive. Apparently, he was writing some kind of book about wilderness survival and wanted to see what people did with their 48 hours to stay alive. He would provide each individual with a backpack containing limited supplies and a GoPro camera to record the adventure. I used to be an Eagle Scout, so I figured, sure, 2 days in the woods is nothing. And with that kind of money, I could buy a new gaming chair for my dorm and have enough left over for pizza for the whole next semester. I messaged him back, and we set up a time to meet. I was to bring nothing other than some sturdy clothes. He said he'd provide everything I would need to survive in the woods for the 2 days. When I met with him, he seemed like a nice enough guy. Clearly, he was very wealthy, too, as he dropped me off at my spot in the forest with his personal helicopter. On the flight over, he explained that the backpack had a GPS tracking device in it so that he could find me wherever I was after the 48 hours, and he'd come pick me up. I thought it was safe to assume this guy knew what he was doing, considering all the prep work he'd put into this, so I trusted him. He dropped me off and flew away. I spent the first few minutes sorting through what I had in the backpack. There was a simple pocket knife, which I stuffed into a front cargo pocket on my pants for quick access. I was given a small journal, which I also put in my cargo pants. The rest of the contents were a matchbook with 2 matches, a full water bottle, one of those silver thermal blankets, some rope, and various other supplies you'd expect to see in a survival kit that I doubted I'd be using. Oh, and of course the GoPro, which I'd strapped to my chest. There was no map, compass, or any kind of navigation equipment. The idea, I guess, was that I was lost in the woods and had to survive. So I set off. I spent most of the first day hiking in as straight a path as I could manage. Other than the clearing where we landed, it was nothing but thick wooded areas so far. My first goal was to find a source of water I could come back to when needed, but so far no luck. I was dropped off in the early afternoon, so at this point it was starting to get dark and the temperature was dropping. I decided I should start setting up camp. I gathered various small branches and brush from around the area and found a small clearing where I could start a fire without setting the whole forest ablaze. I used the tiny pocket knife to cut off smaller branches from the surrounding trees and got a decent-sized stockpile of wood for the night. I had to make use of some of the pages from this journal for kindling to get the fire started and carefully lit one of the 2 matches I had to get it going. So far, so good. I took out the thermal blanket and laid down to sleep next to the fire. I awoke before the rise of the sun. The fire was just a mess of ash at this point, and I didn't want to waste my other match, so early getting another fire started. So I packed everything up and set off again. After several more hours of hiking, I finally heard something that was music to my ears running water. A stream. At this point, my water bottle was nearly empty, so I was ecstatic that I'd be able to finish it off and refill. 2 days out here for $1,000? Easiest money I've ever made. I followed the sound of the water to a small stream that seemed to go on for quite a way. After filling my bottle, I decided I'd follow this stream in the direction it was flowing from, ideally to find a lake or something. I still had plenty of daylight left, so I kept going. I was getting pretty hungry at this point, so it'd be nice to find a lake with some fish in it, but even in the worst-case scenario, I could last 2 days without food no problem. It was getting dark again, and the stream I was following was getting wider, but still no lake in sight. I should have just set up camp right then while I still had daylight, but I was determined to find this lake, and kept going. After a couple more hours, it was just too dark to continue. There was some moonlight shining through the leaves above, but not much. Not enough to keep following this stream. So I did the best I could to gather up some more wood for another fire in the dark of the night, and set up a makeshift campground again. I started the fire with pages from the journal for kindling again, and used my last match. I hunkered down and went to sleep, excited to find this lake the following morning and get some food before the guy picked me up to go back home. Loud cracking woke me up in the middle of the night branches, breaking from all around me. I sprang to my feet, startled. I wasn't sure what kind of wildlife was out here, but it could very well be bears or wolves. Adrenaline began pumping through my body, and I tried to listen for where the sounds were coming from, but I could barely hear over my heartbeat. I had to do something, though. I couldn't just stand here like an idiot waiting to be eaten. Whatever kind of animal this was, I felt like I'd be safe if I could climb one of these trees. As the cracking of branches grew closer and louder, I began to climb a big pine tree near me, with plenty of branches making it easy enough to climb. The fire was dying down very quickly, but I had enough residual light to start the climb. I got up 1, 2, 3, 4 branches, probably about 6 feet from the ground when the noises stopped. So I stopped too. I strained my ears to listen, but again, it was difficult to hear over my heartbeat. I sat there for what seemed like an eternity, 2 of my hands gripping adjacent branches above, one of my feet supporting me, and the other foot hanging freely. Nothing but silence around me now. I thought maybe whatever was had gone now, and that I was safe. I adjusted my grip on the tree, when the branch my foot was on broke off, and I lost my grip on the branches above. I fell backwards and hit my head on the hard ground below, knocking me unconscious. I don't know how long I was out, but when I awoke, it was still dark. Even darker than before, it seemed. I wasn't on the ground where I'd landed, though. I was on a flat surface like a table. I tried to sit up and look around, but I couldn't move. I realized then that my hands and feet were bound to this table. I panicked, flexing every muscle in my body, trying to get free of this trap. I screamed, "What?" over and over again. As I struggled, I heard what sounded like voices all around me, but I could not discern what the voices were saying. I thought I was alone out here. I was literally out in the middle of nowhere. Who is out here, who is strapping people down in the middle of the forest? I continued to convulse my body, feeling the bindings that were holding me down loosen ever so slightly. That's when shit got really scary, though. I don't know if I was drugged or what, but really crazy stuff started to happen. I heard a loud, thumping noise. I heard branches breaking, trees, entire trees being snapped in half from the sound of it. Something was getting closer to me. The voices around me got louder, sounding like some kind of chanting. I quickly realized that I was some kind of sacrifice. Maybe this was all in my head. I really don't know. The absurdity of it all makes it difficult for me to believe that whatever was happening was real. The thumping and cracking of the woods grew louder and louder, until I could make out some kind of silhouette against the backdrop of the woods in front of me, barely illuminated by the moonlight. It was huge. Whatever it was impossibly huge. I was freaking out like I'd never freaked out before. I screamed as I continued trying to get free of the bindings holding me down, as I watched the forest being torn down in front of me, the chanting from the voices growing louder and louder. The beast was probably 100 yards away from me when I got one of my hands loose. My face was a mess of tears and snot from crying, which I hadn't realized I'd been doing until now. I broke my hand free and quickly wiped away at my face before getting to work on the other bindings. Once I had that one hand free, I was able to make quick work of the other bindings. I got my other hand free, and the creature let out a deafening roar. The chanting voices around me stopped. I hastened my pace and shakily got to work on the bindings on my feet. After a mere couple of seconds, I was free of these as well. I sprang up from the table and began to run. I fell over almost immediately. I was incredibly dizzy. They had to have drugged me. I got back up and continued running away from the beast. I could still hear the forest being torn down behind me, but I did not turn around to look. I just kept running, struggling to overcome the dizziness and keep upright. Whatever this thing was, it was either very slow or just didn't care enough to pursue me. After a few minutes of running, I could no longer hear the creature, the breaking of the trees, or the chanting voices. But I did not stop. I could not stop. Even if the creature didn't continue in my pursuit, chances are the source of those voices would not let their sacrifice get away that easily. Eventually, I saw the sun rising on the horizon, and I figured I'd been running for long enough. I stopped, leaned back against a tree, and slouched to the ground. I was so scared and in so much pain from the fall from the tree, the bindings on my hands and feet, the tumble to the ground when I got free, and all the thorns and shit I ran into during my escape. I put my head between my legs and sobbed uncontrollably. Once I was done with my episode, I wiped off my face with my shirt and assessed my situation. I no longer had the backpack or the GoPro. In my cargo pockets, I still had the small pocket knife. I wish I'd realized sooner that I still had this, and this journal. But that was all. I almost had a psychotic break when I realized that without that backpack, the guy who brought me here had no way of finding me. I had to get myself together and figure out what I was going to do. The stream I was following the previous night was nowhere near. I had no idea where I was in relation to the stream, my starting point, or even the sacrificial area I'd just run from. I was lost to begin with, but now I was really lost. They say that if you get lost in the woods, you should stay where you're at so that you're not continually running away from whatever search parties they may send to find you. But I couldn't do that. Not with whatever that creature was out there, and the cultists or whoever they were that were helping it. I had to keep moving, and I had to come up with a plan on how I was going to get that backpack back. After a few minutes collecting myself, I stood up and began to walk. I didn't know where I was going, but I figured I had like a 50% chance of finding my starting point, the cultist area, or the stream I was following if I just kept walking. It was a few hours yet to the 48-hour mark, so he'd have to come looking for me soon. Maybe if I heard his helicopter, I could somehow signal him. I walked for hours, and everything was still so unfamiliar. The sun was at its highest point, but still no sound of a helicopter. I don't even know how far those people brought me from where I was at. I could be miles away from where I thought I was. I kept walking all day. Eventually, it was getting dark again, and I was still lost. I had no supplies. All I had was my pocket knife and my journal. Well, one thing I learned in my time in Boy Scouts was how to start a fire by rubbing a couple of sticks together. So I took out my pocket knife and got to work on gathering wood. I knew I wouldn't be sleeping tonight. It was too risky, but I at least had to keep warm. After probably an hour of rubbing a couple of sticks together, I never really had the patience to get this to work before. I finally got a fire going. I had to use more pages from the journal to get the fire started. So at this point, I figured I needed to conserve the pages. I didn't know how long I was going to be out here. As anticipated, I didn't sleep at all. I just sat by the fire all night, trying to keep the flames small as to not draw any unwanted attention. Nothing ever came to bother me, though. Morning came, and I'd been out here for almost 3 days now. I was overcome with hunger and thirst. If I was to be out here for a while, I absolutely had to find that stream again. I tried to remember which way I was walking those first 2 days based on the position of the sun. I think I figured it out and started walking the opposite direction, perpendicular to the way I had been walking the day before. I walked all day in that direction, and still nothing. So I set up camp and actually slept a little bit that night. The next day, I finally found some water. I don't know if it was the same stream I saw before, but it didn't matter. At least I'd be able to survive a little bit longer. I brought my face down to the stream and gulped directly from it like an animal. I was amazed at how much I was able to drink and how satisfying it was. I used some of the water to wash my face and feet and set off to follow the stream to its source. I followed this stream for several days. I didn't want to stray too far from it, as it was the only thing really keeping me alive. Eventually, though, I came across a larger portion of the stream where I saw several frogs and tadpoles. I was fucking starving at this point. I didn't care how disgusting it was. I was going to eat these frogs. So that's what I did. I started a small fire using the same technique that I was starting to get pretty good at, and I cooked some frogs and ate them. People say it tastes like chicken, and well, they're not wrong. I continued this routine of following the stream for the next couple days, and it was getting wider. I was starting to think that I had found my way again, and my theory was confirmed when I saw the ashes of my fire from the second night. Luckily, I had daylight to work with this time. This is where I fell from the tree, and they took me away somewhere. I'm not an expert tracker by any means, but there were definite signs of broken branches that I was able to follow, hopefully, to where they brought me to. I followed this trail for a long, long time, and when I was starting to think I wasn't going to find what I was looking for, I saw it. I saw an opening in the forest where that beast had come through, and I saw the table where they strapped me down. I kept my distance, assessing the area. I didn't see any signs of human or animal life, but if they took my backpack, it had to be near here. That brings me to now. I'm writing this all down just in case I fail and I don't get the backpack. I'm going to hang this journal from a nearby tree. If I don't come back for it, that probably means that whatever is in these woods has killed me. And like I said, you can stop looking. Whatever that thing was, if it wasn't in my imagination, I have no doubt that it could kill me without much trouble. If you're reading this, I am definitely dead. And that's all there was. There were no more blank pages to write on if he wanted to. He had used up the rest of these pages for kindling, I guess. I searched around the area. I found the journal to see if I could find any evidence of his encounters, but I don't see any cavities in the forest from a large creature, and I don't see any kind of table that he might have been bound to. There's no sign that any of this actually happened from what I can tell. The date he wrote down was 2 years ago, so I did some research. As I mentioned earlier, there was something really strange about all this, and I'm not talking about the creature he described. It's likely that the knock on his head had him confused, and his mind was filling in the blanks for something that didn't really happen. I looked him up on Google first and found a missing persons report from August of 2017. So he definitely existed, and this wasn't just some prank journal somebody left in the woods. Then I looked him up on Facebook. His last Facebook post just said, "Going camping for a couple days, won't have phone service. Talk to you all soon." So he didn't really tell people what he was doing. I got a hold of the boy's family and gave them this journal and tried to get more information from them. Obviously, this was very hard for them to take in, but curiosity got the better of me, and I had to know more. I convinced them to sign into their son's Facebook account, which they were able to get into as his password was saved on the home computer, and to look for the message he talked about in the journal. We found the message he described in his journal from the guy offering $1,000. Only thing is, this guy was a ghost. He never existed. His name doesn't turn up any results, and if it truly was a wilderness survival guide author, I would for sure have found something. But no, it all seemed to be some kind of scam. Whoever this guy was, he actually convinced this kid to go to the woods by himself, promising to pick him up after 2 days, likely with no intention to actually follow through. How many kids did he do this to? Was there actually some kind of cult out there he was working with, bringing them sacrifices? Well, hopefully the police will be able to find something out. I doubt I'll ever hear the results of their findings, but I just really hope they find this guy. I'll leave you with a little piece of advice. Never go out into the woods alone, especially without any kind of communications or navigation equipment. And for the love of God, let someone know where you're going. Fourth story, the wrong deer. Whenever I tell this story, I always start it in the same way. I don't care if anyone believes me. Either you do, and so you can empathize with me, or you don't, so you think I've created this terrifying experience out of thin air. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. This story is completely true. There is something stalking the mesquite thickets of East New Mexico. Several years ago, I was working at a dude ranch in southeast New Mexico. My job was incredibly enjoyable, and I made some of my closest friends out there, including my fiancée. The landscape was absolutely gorgeous. The ranch occupied almost 2,000 acres of rolling prairie and scrubland, with the back half being thickets of cactus and mesquite. The edge of the property was part of the Tonkawa River with a huge field leading down the hill to the bank. I'm creating a map of the property because locations will become important to the story. The first time I saw anything that gave me pause was one of my first nights at the ranch. We were due for some rain that night, and in the morning I had to demonstrate how to start a fire to a group I was taking out on trail. Not wanting to embarrass myself with wet wood, I had the bright idea to go gather some before it started raining. Unfortunately for me, this was around 10 p.m. and was the only bright thing that night. We were about 40 minutes outside the nearest town, and with the sky being overcast, my weak little flashlight barely illuminated the path ahead of me. We had this huge old oak tree just right in front of the tree line, and that was my destination. After a bit of a walk, you got to the tree and started piling wood in a bucket I brought. I've never had much of a problem with being out in the woods at night, but that night was so dark, it was difficult to keep my thoughts from straying into eerie places. After a couple minutes, I felt like I was being watched. I started to glance around, but the hair-raising sensation of no longer being alone became a bit overwhelming, and I was less and less confident being out there. As I turned around towards the trail, I froze. Staring out of the darkness were two glowing green eyes. They didn't blink or move, just stared at me. They were roughly 40 feet away on the other side of the path I had to reach. My gut wrenched. It was just so unnerving. I slowly walked forward till I got to the path and then started to back away, never turning my back from them. My flashlight was too dim to ever see what the eyes belonged to, but just the fact I had to look slightly up at them made my skin crawl. Finally, when I judged I was far enough away, I turned and ran down the path back down to the road into our guest area and to my house. The morning after, I had to run a camera to a group that was gathering at the oak tree. As I was leaving, I realized that place where the eyes had been was a clearing. The eyes were roughly in the middle of the clearing, and it was large enough in diameter that there was no way they could have belonged to something in a tree. I'm well over 6 feet tall. Based off of how far back I had to tilt my head to meet its gaze, it was easily over 7 feet tall. The realization made my blood run cold. Now, of course, nobody believed me. At first. But this was only my first encounter with whatever prowled those woods, and the only one where I was ever alone. My second run-in with this thing about 4 months later in June. New summer staff arrived, and I was the only carryover into a new season. In our staff lounge one evening, I joined a group of about 9 other staff sharing creepy stories. My friend Elijah was in the middle of a doozy, and when he was finished, he begged me to tell mine again. He'd heard it before, but he was the only one. I told everybody I could tell them, or I could show them where it happened. Of course, everybody elected to go out to the oak with me. Once we were there, I told my tale and left everyone sufficiently on edge. The mood was still light, and since we were out there anyway, Elijah suggested we head out to a large boulder deeper in the trees. The group was even between guys and girls, and there was a definite flirtatious vibe between most, so we agreed. Now, to get to this boulder, we would cross through the pasture that led down to the river, and afterwards, down this very narrow path where the brush was so thick and the trail was so windy, you couldn't get more than around 10 feet of visibility in front and behind you, with nothing on either side. We made it through the pasture with no difficulty besides Elijah scaring one of the girls by jumping out from behind a tree. Once on the narrow path, we had to walk 2 abreast, and my other buddy Alexander and I took up the rear. He and I were the only 2 who heard the voice. Calling out from the pasture we were just at. It almost seemed female, but was completely devoid of emotion or pain. Calling out softly, "Ow, help me." Alexa and I looked at each other, our eyes huge. I'm sure I was also as pale as he looked. There should have been nobody else out there with us. Our group were the only ones who had the night off, and it wasn't very plausible that a group of guests would be out there, and we didn't encounter them. Besides, anyone trying to mess with us surely would have just screamed or just even said more. I cannot begin to describe how wrong the voice was. The tone and inflection were almost robotic, and "Ow, help me" was all it said. We started to hurry everyone else up without freaking them out, and we came out of that section of trail with the 2 of us looking behind us constantly. When we got to the boulder, we tried to convince everyone to head back, but to no avail. Finally, Alex and I said we were going to leave, but as we turned around, we all saw the deer. It was on the trail we just exited, just standing there watching us, but so much of it was wrong. It was much taller than any other deer we'd seen out there, and there were plenty. It was also somehow longer and crooked. Its head almost looked like it was put on sideways to its neck. It just stood there looking at us, its appearance generally unnerving, but what it did next was why frightened me the most. It backed up into the trees until we could no longer see it. That's what freaked me out the most. Every deer I've ever seen either turns outright and runs away, or just freezes till you get too close. This one just backed up out of sight. It was such a simple movement, but it was so unnatural, exactly like the call for help. We all looked around at each other nervously for a few minutes, then scrambled off the rock. When we were all huddled in a group, we ran together past where we'd seen it last, tore across the pasture, and past the oak tree, till we stood panting on the porch of the lounge. We never really spoke of that night together again, but I always include it in any retelling of this story. I have one more large encounter, the one that made me refuse to go back in the woods after dark. One thing you must understand is that there were several months between these three accounts. Enough time for me to think, surely whatever that was isn't still here, right? The final time I went out into those woods was with my now fiancée. She and I had just started officially dating about a week before this terrible camping trip. I'd grown up camping as a kid, but she'd never been. Wanted to share with her something I found incredibly meaningful to my early life. I convinced her to join me for a one-night trip out into the woods. My plan was to go out there Friday evening through Sunday morning, and since she had to work Saturday, she joined me for my final night out there. Friday night was completely uneventful. I pitched my tent out off of one of the dirt access roads in one of the spots used for overnight groups. It was a very average solo camping trip. I enjoyed myself completely. The next Saturday, my fiancée Haley drove up the dirt road to join me. It was once again a very nice evening making hot dogs and s'mores, and after a couple beers, we retired to the tent. As we settled down for the night, we both heard something out in the woods. Haley turned to ask me if I'd also heard something, but I regretfully snapped at her to be quiet. There was no anger, but at that sound, the other two frightening stories I had were at the forefront of my mind. The sound we heard was very faint. If it hadn't lasted more than a few seconds, it could have been dismissed as wind, but it lasted much longer. It was singing, but completely toneless, devoid of any kind of humanity. It grew steadily louder, making wide half circles towards our campsite. Our site was in a clearing off an access road. We were way out past the boulder from a few months previous. This clearing was surrounded by prickly pear and mesquite, basically creating a massive barbed wire fence around us. The only clear spot was the path that led to the road, but the singing was coming from the opposite end of the clearing. Something was out in the woods, making its way through thorns and scrub, singing in a language we'd never heard before. Haley looked as terrified as I felt. I unzipped the tent and peered out with my light into the tree line. I couldn't see anything, but I could tell from the singing that whatever it was just out of my view, less than 100 feet from the tent. It knew where we were and didn't care if we knew where it was. I told Haley to run to the car. She scrambled out of the tent and ran through the dark towards her car. I followed, barefoot, only in shorts, with my knife and phone clutched in my hand. We made to the car as the singing became deafeningly loud. We sped back to our lodging and spent the night wide awake in her room, her lying on her bed and I propped against the door, occasionally checking the windows. Well, in the morning, we drove back to pick up our stuff. The tent had been torn apart. Everything else was ransacked. A horrible odor pervaded the clearing. What sent shivers down my spine, however, were the massive scratches and gouges in the tree nearest where the tent lay scattered. We finished up our contract and quickly moved to Colorado together. We also work a ranch up here, and I'm glad to say nothing about the woods up here feel malevolent. I've never heard any singing or seen any wrong deer, or been asked for help from any weird voices. I'm completely content to stay far away from the mesquite thickets of New Mexico for the rest of my life. Fifth story. Not sure if it was a Wendigo, but something odd happened. When I was 8 years old, both of my parents worked full-time. My dad was predominantly on third shift at his job, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. We lived literally right up the road from my grandparents in a very small town. It was getting close to my 9th birthday when I contracted strep throat and scarlet fever. I was severely sick, could barely speak, had the first case of cold sweats that I remember in my life, and could barely pull myself out of bed to even use the restroom. I was absolutely miserable, and of course, being as young as I was, I didn't take the pain very well. My poor mother was at a loss of what to do with her working and my dad needing to use daylight hours to sleep. The first day I was sick, perhaps it was a Tuesday. My birthday would fall on a Friday. My dad stayed up most of the day with me, made me food, let me sleep in his lap on the couch, wiped my forehead down, made sure I took my medicine, etc. But on the second day, my grandmother had called and offered to let me stay at her house so my dad could sleep. He said yes, and woke me up around 7 that morning to drive me up to her home. My grandfather also worked at this time too, so he was already gone to work when I arrived there. I don't remember too much of the early morning. I probably just slept in my grandmother's bed, tossing and turning when I'd wake up feeling extra bad. She encouraged me to swallow my awful-tasting medicine a little more gently than my dad did. She did fix me some tomato soup to try and eat, and it was the first time since I'd gotten sick that I had an appetite. I should mention my grandmother had this cute Yorkshire Terrier named Samson. He was very docile, not like the usual annoying, barking all the time terriers. Samson came into the room and curled up next to me as I dozed. I didn't know when I woke up at some point. It had to be the early afternoon/lunchtime because I could hear the TV faintly from the living room on some game show. My grandmother had a ritual of eating her lunch while watching a game show. I think it was The Price is Right. I was trying to fall back asleep because I had gotten this really bad headache, maybe from dehydration. I was on the verge of sleep when I was jolted awake by this Samson yelp that erupted from the living room. The terrier curled up next to my feet, perked up, but didn't move. I knew I had heard his name being called too, but it was odd he didn't respond. Samson. My grandmother called again. Samson. Samson. The dog still didn't run out of the room to her. I was confused, as he was so obedient to my grandmother. He was almost frozen, staring at the cracked, open door, but making no attempt to go to her. She called Samson, maybe 3 or 4 more times. Then I got annoyed. I remember flinging the covers off of me. Of course, my clothes are sticky with sweat, and I just generally feel uncomfortable and groggy. I stumble out of the room, wiping my eyes, asking Grandma, "Do you need Samson?" "He's in your room with me. I'm in the living room, and I have to do a double take. The TV is still on and blaring. There's a bowl of soup sitting on a coffee table and an open Pepsi next to it, but my grandmother isn't anywhere in the room. Maybe she's in the bathroom?" I crossed the room and went past the kitchen, empty too. I got to the bathroom door, which was shut, and knocked. Nothing. I then opened it. No one was in there. The house is empty. It's not a huge house either. I've covered all of the rooms. So yes, my first reaction was to get scared. I could clearly hear my grandmother calling for the dog, but she's not anywhere inside. I can feel my hands and feet get all tingly. I start shouting for my grandma, but my voice is just echoing through the small, cramped home. Samson had gotten up at this point and was sitting near the couch, looking completely undisturbed. I fumbled for the remote and turned the TV off and yelled, more like wheezed to the top of my lungs, which you can imagine how painful this was with a scratchy, infected throat. "Grandma." The worst part happened next. I heard her shouting my name back, clear as ever, like she was standing only feet away. I start crying now, scared out of my mind. I feel like maybe it has to be a ghost. I grew up with scary ghost stories courtesy of my dad, and I'm convinced now I'm in the room with a ghost. And then whatever this was, proceeded to call my name again. Then there was a second voice, definitely not my grandmother's. It was deeper, definitely more masculine, and absolutely terrifying as it shouted, "Come to the front door." I did not do that. Instead, I made sure to run back to my grandparents' bedroom, lock the door, and pick up the telephone on their nightstand. I called my own home phone, and my dad's sleepy voice answered. Through a barely comprehensible voice, I managed to croak something like, "Daddy, there's someone in the house, and I can't find Grandma." "She's gone." My dad, of course, said he jumped out of bed, grabbed his Swiss Army knife he kept in a drawer next to the bed, and ran down the road to the house in his PJs and bare feet. He ran up to the front door, jiggled the handle. It was locked. So he made his way around, and since he knew the garage code, just punched it in and got inside. A quick sweep of the 3 rooms of the home showed no one was in there. It's not like there was really anywhere to hide. I ran out of the room once I was sure he was there and began bawling in his arms. He kept reassuring me there was no one here, and then asked if I didn't know where Grandma possibly was. I said I hadn't, and explained I'd woken up to her calling for Samson, but she hadn't been anywhere there. This was back when cell phones were definitely around, but there were no iPhones, and my grandparents certainly wouldn't have been buying them anyway. My dad had one, but not on him at the time. I could tell he was trying to keep calm. So he just said we would need to go back to our house. I was sure he was probably going to call the police at that point, just because my grandma still hadn't popped up and her car had been in the garage when he got in. If she'd left, she'd gone on foot. We hadn't even made 2 steps out of the driveway when from my grandma's neighbor's house, my grandma was strolling out, chatting to the neighbor. She saw my dad and then me, cry my eyes out, and immediately ran over to see what was wrong. She was super apologetic. She said she'd stepped out right when she'd heated up her soup to go see her neighbor, who'd called about looking at something my grandma was going to buy. My grandma had figured I was asleep, and she'd only be gone for 10 or 15 minutes. At first, people may have assumed I was feverish, therefore delusional, but I still stand by what happened. I know for a fact I was definitely alone in the house, save for Samson, but the voices I heard were real. For a while, I was hesitant to go back to my grandma's house, because this happened in the middle of the day. I later read stories at school about Wendigos, or creatures that would disguise their voices to lure people. This was the closest explanation I could ever form about what I heard. I never shared to anyone that I thought it was for sure a Wendigo, and chalked it up to maybe just a ghost. I'm close to my 20s now. Last year was the first time I shared this story fully to my grandpa, who used to just say the fever must have made me had bad dreams. We were sitting on the front porch of the house, smoking cigarettes and exchanging anecdotes. When I finished telling him, for the first time he looked sort of disturbed about it. He finally put his cigarette out and just stared out into the road. Then he cleared his throat and looked over at me. You know, he said slowly, some funny things used to happen around that time. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up to take a piss or something. When I'd first sit up in the bed, I could hear your grandma sleeping away, snoring. He chuckled, but his face grew serious again. Anyways, I'd always hear her calling for the dog. I tried to remain looking calm, but my voice still shook when I asked him, even when she was sleeping? Sleep-talking? No, he shook his head. I heard her calling from outside, maybe the living room. I don't know, honey. She'd call for the dog, she'd call my name. All while she was really sleeping next to me, sleeping like a baby. Have you ever told anyone? No, I don't want to scare her. She's real scared of ideas like ghosts and stuff. That's why when you were younger and that thing happened, I told her just to remember you've been sick, fever and all. Probably having nightmares. He looked gravely at me. Don't repeat this to her, please. Honey, she's really not the type to be scaring. Of course, I wanted to cry. I had this itchy, creepy feeling suddenly about being at the house. Grandpa, do you still hear it sometimes? Oh yes. He was now reaching into his breast pocket to get out another cigarette. Every night. But you just got to remember not to do what it says. Even the dog figured it out. If it says to come to the door, you stay away from the door. If it says, I don't know, come here, you just stay still in the room until it quits calling. With that, he asked to borrow my lighter again. 6th story. Wendigo. I never thought it would be the last time I saw my little sister. It started out as such a typical Friday afternoon. The bell rung, and we had the whole weekend to look forward to. We lived in a small town in Michigan. It was one of those towns where everyone knew everyone. One of those towns where you basically felt safe anywhere you went. We lived in a small split-level house. My little sister and I shared a bedroom, and my parents were directly across the hall from us. Our house backed onto a deep, vast forest, and through the middle of the forest was a river. The woods always provided a sort of natural playground for the local kids, building tree forts, playing hide and go seek, and swimming the more shallow parts of the river. My little sister and I felt especially lucky. The woods were essentially my backyard, and we really felt like they were ours. Our parents were fine with us playing in the woods. They just had one rule: don't cross to the other side of the river. The woods on our side of the river were quite well traveled by all the locals. By age 7, you knew them like the back of your hand. The other side of the river, however, was much less traveled. It was our town's myth, kind of our own scary claim to fame. The Mi'kmaq tribe had largely settled the area around our town, so there were a lot of stories based on Native American culture. Everyone's favorite story was about the Wendigo. A Wendigo is a Native American legend, supposedly a half-man, half-beast type creature. The rumor is that during a harsh Michigan winter, a member of the Mi'kmaq tribe and his hunting partner got caught during a blizzard. The tribe member's partner died, and with no food, the tribe member was forced to eat him. Native Americans believe that Wendigos are born when a member of their tribe is forced to resort to cannibalism due to harsh conditions, such as weather or a famine. And so, legend was born, and people began to believe that a Wendigo hunted for more flesh in our woods. Everyone from here has a story that they would be having a campfire in the woods, and all of a sudden a deep resonating roar would sound out through the forest. The belief around here was that the Wendigo would not hunt for you. So long as you stayed on our side of the river, the rest of the woods beyond the river belonged to him. As per usual Friday ritual, my friends and I filled our backpacks with our swim trunks, snacks, soda, and other trinkets to spend the rest of the day playing in the woods. As we were leaving, my little sister came running out of the house. I was 13 and she was 9. She was begging me to come spend the day in the woods with my friends and I. Normally, I would say no, but it was such a beautiful day, and she really was not much of a hassle to have along, so I said yes. There were 4 of us, including my little sister and I. It was 3 in the afternoon at the beginning of June, so we knew we would have daylight for quite a while. Off we went into the woods, taking the same trail that we took every time. The trail led us straight to the river, where we would set up a little camp and spend the rest of the day playing and swimming. A few hours rolled by, and we were pretty tired. There was not much left to do, so I suggested that we pack up and head home. Now, 13 can be quite a rebellious age, the age where you start to disobey your parents, maybe act out in school here and there, try a cigarette, pretty typical teenage behavior. "Let's cross to the other side of the river," one of my friends exclaimed. In my head, I knew this was a terrible idea. Growing up here, you barely have any rules to follow. Not going to the other side of the river was an explicit one. However, yeah, I've always wanted to do that, my other friends said in agreement. In my head, I knew this was a bad idea, but I also did not want to seem like a chicken in front of my friends. "Well, okay," I said cautiously. My little sister looked at me. Her big blue eyes were full of fear. I reassured her, telling her that nothing bad would happen. And so, we began to walk to the point in the river where it was shallow enough to walk across. We arrived, and I will be honest, the other side of the river looked like an entirely different world. It was darker. It honestly just had this entire unfriendly vibe to it. I brushed it off that it was all in my head. It was about 7:30 p.m., and the sun was beginning to set in the sky, though we still had plenty of daylight. We walked across the river. It was about ankle deep at this point, and the water was frigid here, a lot colder than it was where we were swimming. I put my foot down on the other side of the river. For the first time in my entire life, I had done what so many people who grew up here fear to do. Just standing there felt uneasy. It really felt like we did not belong there. But at the same time, there was that feeling of adrenaline pumping through my body, and it carried me as we began walking deeper into the woods. My little sister was attached to my hip. I felt bad. She truly had no interest in being here, but also wanted to appear brave in front of my friends. As we got deeper into the woods, the feeling of dread increased. The weird part is, it was not what I could hear. It's what I could not hear. There was not a sound, not a cricket, not a bird, not even the river. It was silent, deadly silent. The trees seemed so much thicker in this part of the woods. Not as much sunlight came through, so it was definitely darker, not just my imagination. Crack we heard in the distance. Everyone gasped. I cannot reiterate enough that it was silent. There was not a single noise coming from anywhere, but then to hear that distinct crack, it made my heart skip a beat. Probably just a deer. There's tons of them in the woods. One of my friends stated. At this point, I want to turn back, but for some reason we just kept going. The stories were echoing through my head about the Wendigo, about how foolish people over the years had dared to cross over to this side of the river, and how they were never seen again. As we continued to explore the uncharted part of the woods, another crack this time came from behind us. That one really startled everyone. We had all decided that it was time to head back. It was really starting to get dark. There was just one problem. This side of the woods was unfamiliar to us, and we were lost. My little sister began to cry upon realizing this, and while I was doing my best to settle her down, she was really scared, and I have to admit that I was too. The minimal light that was previously coming down from between the thick trees was now beginning to fade as the sun began to set. The darkness was becoming even darker, and we had not even thought to bring flashlights. The thought of Wendigo ran through my head time and time again, each time sending a sickening chill down my spine. We tried everything we could to find our way back to the shallow spot of the river, but it was to no avail. We could not even find the river to begin with. Crack we heard again from behind us, then a low rumble, a rumble that resonated through the trees. Whoosh, a gust of wind hit us from the side, knocking me back and knocking my little sister over. The rumble got louder, growing into more of a roar. "It's a bear!" screamed one of my friends. Whoosh, another gust of wind hit us, this time from behind. Crack. Whoosh, this time it hit us in the front, knocking all of us over. "Run!" I bellowed, and we all ran, leaving our backpacks behind. I had my little sister's hand in mine, essentially dragging her through the dirt and leaves on the ground of the forest. I could definitely hear something running. Fast footsteps. They would be behind us, then beside us, then gone. "It's the river!" screamed one of my friends. We all stopped as we approached the river's edge. It was too dark to tell if it was shallow or deep at this point. The roar returned, this time coming from behind us, and it was close. "We have to jump in," I said. And oh, my two friends and my little sister screamed simultaneously. Fast footsteps approached, a low growl, and multiple cracks as the predator approached us. "Now!" I screamed, and then we jumped. The last thing I heard before my head sunk under the water was a roar. Inhuman, and nothing like an animal could produce. I knew it had just chased us, and I know how good of a hunter it is. My question to myself was why, and how are we still alive? The water was pitch black, and it was deep. We were all strong swimmers, and managed to find our way to the other side of the river, our side of the river. Even in the dark, we were able to navigate this side of the river and find our way back to the trail that led to my house. The whole walk back, all I could think about how was if Wendigo wanted us dead, we would be dead. Every legend about it speaks about how it is the best hunter and how once it tracks you, you are dead. We arrived back at my house to some very angry parents scolding us. We all explained how we had just lost track of time, having too much fun playing in the woods. They bought all of our explanations. No way were we going to mention the fact that we went exactly where we had been told not to go our entire lives. I prepared myself for bed and went to lie down in my bed. It was hot this time of year, so my window was open. It was letting in a gentle breeze that felt quite nice, so I decided to just leave it open. As I lie there, I hear the sound of the quick footsteps again, accompanied by the low rumbling. My palms began to sweat. My heart dropped into my stomach. Had Wendigo tracked us back to our house? As slowly as possible, I turned the lever and closed my window, doing my best not to make sound. My little sister was asleep on the bed parallel to mine, and I did not want her to hear any of this. I shut the window and flipped the latch to lock it. My parents were asleep. My little sister was asleep. I was the only one awake for this. I lay under my covers, noticing every little sound my old house made. And then I heard it. The kitchen door was opening. It makes a distinct squeak when it opens. I began to shake. Wendigo had come. I could hear it moving about our basement, knocking a glass over, opening cupboards. The sound of fast footsteps below me. The fast footsteps became louder as Wendigo made its way up our staircase into my bedroom door. The knob turned, and Wendigo was inside my bedroom. I shook violently, my hands clammy, my stomach sick. I hid under my covers as I listened to the low rumble grow louder and louder with each footstep it took in my room. And then whoosh, the same sound it had made as it hunted us in the woods. The rumbling had stopped, and the fast footsteps were gone. Wendigo, too, was gone as I emerged from under my covers. But where did it go? The sun shined brightly into my room the next morning, and I hopped out of bed. I went downstairs to find my parents sitting in the kitchen, my dad reading the newspaper and drinking coffee, my mom frying bacon for breakfast. "Morning, champ. You must have slept well after your big day yesterday," my dad said. He was right. It was 11 a.m., and I rarely sleep past 9:30. "The same for your sister," my mom said. "Why don't you go wake her up, champ?" my dad said. I immediately ran upstairs to our room, and to this day, it is still the most horrific sight that I have ever laid eyes upon. My little sister's bed was empty. "Mom, Dad, come quick," I cried out. They both ran upstairs. "Oh my God, where is she?" my mom said. She was already beginning to cry. We looked everywhere. She was not in the house. My parents looked outside, and within an hour, a search party had formed. They searched the woods top to bottom, but she was nowhere to be found. My parents believed that she had wandered off to the woods in the morning, fell in the lake, and drowned. But I knew why they could not find her. I knew why they would never find her. They were looking in the wrong side of the woods. Seventh story. A deer broke into my house. It will never leave. Some nights, I like to lie in bed awake, paralyzed with the fear that my wife will leave me. This particular night was one of those times. I was covered in cold sweat and lay on the mattress clutching the sheets while my beautiful wife, Angela, breathed slowly, rhythmically, next to me. It was insufferable. In the beginning, it was a kaleidoscope of passion that lasted until just after the wedding. Now, every small action she took felt like it was to spite me. Every movement of her deep blue eyes was done to look at another man. I still loved her dearly, but I no longer felt that it was reciprocated. Now, it felt more like the love you have for a favorite TV show or a stuffed animal. I calmed myself and tried to get back to sleep. It was near enough a full moon, and the bright beams that came through the bedroom window made me feel like I was sleeping with a nightlight again. The curtains fluttered gently, and I realized that I'd left the windows open. I lazily swung my legs out of bed and stood up. I was almost at the window when I realized something. I wanted it open. For as long as I could remember, I've suffered from chronic sinus pain. Sleeping with a little fresh air helped alleviate the problems caused by a stuffy room. Angela, however, hated the chill that came with it, and so the window stayed shut. But Angela was asleep, and to hell with the reprimanding I'd get from her in the morning. Triumphantly, I turned back around and got into bed again. I wrapped myself in more of the sheet than I usually get and rolled over to get a good night's sleep. Less than 5 minutes later, I was back up again, closing the bedroom window. There really was no need for me to cast aside my wife's preferences. I'm sure she'd do the same for me. Back to bed, and I'm just lying there, staring at a crack in the ceiling. It's deep, noticeable, and twisted into the same shape as my grandmother's varicose veins. I try to think of how I could fix such a thing. I settled on filling it in with plaster. I rolled over and took my phone from my bedside. I opened notes and left a message for myself to go to the hardware store. I tried never to look at my phone after I went to bed, certainly after Angela came to bed, but in this case I like to think that I have enough self-control. Half an hour later, I put my phone away, having spent the time silently crawling through my TikTok feed, which had been flooded with Malaysian cooking videos. I tried to lay as still as I could and clasp my eyes shut. My endeavor to sleep was cut short by a commotion from downstairs. Alert, I sat bolt upright. Could it be an intruder? A burglar? I rested a hand on Angela's shoulders and tried to shake her awake. She let out a low, guttural grunt and rolled over. I wasn't even sure if I had heard something and didn't want to disturb her over a false alarm. So I stood up, crept to the baseball bat I had propped up against my dresser, and slowly opened the bedroom door. Standing at the top of the hall, I could hear some movement downstairs. Wearily, I moved past the landing to the stairs and began to descend them. All I could think of at that moment was how the real estate agent who told us about the area's near-zero crime rate was lying. I grasped the wooden handle of the bat so hard my knuckles went white. I held it out in front of me as I reached the first floor. The commotion was coming from the kitchen, which I now neared. I held my breath and leapt around the corner. Holding the bat above my head, primed to swing, I confronted the person who broke into our home. Standing in the center of my kitchen was a deer. It wasn't startled by my dramatic entry, and I lowered the bat. For a second, we both stood there, staring at each other. The thing's antlers came up to my shoulders. It had a brown, shaggy coat and inquisitive eyes. I've never been hunting, and this was the first time I saw an animal like this up close. Usually, they'd be rotting on the side of a road. But this creature was breathing heavily, letting out gasps of steam and warm saliva as it did. I noticed that the glass sliding doors were wide open, and I cursed myself for presumably forgetting to close them before I went to bed. Angela and I had been sitting on the deck drinking for most of the evening after all. I tried to shoo the beast back through the entrance, and when that didn't work, tried to gently take a hold of its antlers and guide it out. As soon as I touched them, it bucked its head wildly and took a step forward. I recoiled in shock, then quietly laughed at myself for being so intimidated by Bambi. I shouted at it, but it didn't move an inch. I thought deer were supposed to be skittish around humans. When my problem didn't immediately fix itself, I obviously turned to the internet. I sat back on an ugly chair my wife inherited that we keep out in the hall for some reason, and took out my phone as the deer trotted laps on my kitchen island. I searched online for what to do if a deer gets trapped in your house. No clear results came up, and no deleted Reddit user from 12 years ago made a post about having the same extremely niche problem, as is usually the case. Both my wife and I have lived in the city all our lives until recently. Maybe this was just what we had to contend with. Now we live out in the exurbs. With no idea what to do next, I decided to go wake up my wife. I cursed our house's open plan, as there was no door between the kitchen and the connecting hallway that I could close. I just hoped the deer would stay where it was. Just before I ascended the stairs, I saw it was beginning to make its way further into the house. I let out a long sigh that didn't end until I reached my bedroom. Like a trooper, Angela was still asleep, snoring softly. I walked to her side and crouched down. I put a hand on her shoulder and gently shook her awake. She bolted upright when she finally did, her fight or flight kicking in. Angie, it's just me. It's just me, I said, trying to help her grasp what was going on. She sat upright and wiped her tired eyes with her palm. Why did you wake me up? She barked, frustrated. We have a guest, I joked downstairs. A deer broke in somehow. I think I left the patio doors open. A deer, she whispered, still half asleep. Yeah, I tried to get it out, but it wouldn't play ball. I replied. And why did you wake me up? Asked Angela. You know I have to get up at 6. I know, it's just that I need help, I said, suddenly feeling embarrassed. Angela got out of bed, muttering about how I couldn't do anything on my own. She threw on a cardigan and followed me downstairs. I was giving her a more in-depth rundown of what had happened when we reached the ground floor and saw something that stopped us in our tracks. Laying on the hardwood floor was the deer, dead from the looks of it. I took a step closer and saw that its eyes were glassy, and its tongue hung lame from its jaws. My wife clasped her hands around her mouth and expressed her disgust with a groan. I crouched by the dead deer and noticed something strange about its body. It seemed deflated, hollow. I reached out and touched its stomach against my wife's protest, and to my surprise, the deer's side began to sink inwards until it was concave. It felt boneless. I took a frightened step back, and it was at that point that I noticed the long, perfectly straight cut that ran the length of the beast's belly. Blood and organs should have been spewing out, but there was no such thing. It was sterile. I stood up and turned to my wife. Before I could say anything, I saw that she was pointing. I looked, following her index finger, and my gaze found the basement door. It was now wide open. The only things we have in the basement are boxes for storage, and we hardly ever go down there. Guided by Angela, I approached the open door. I took one step into the darkness and felt around for the light switch. I flipped it on, but nothing happened. I flipped it again and again, but still nothing. Before I could ask, my wife went and got a flashlight from the kitchen. She came back, handed it to me, and urged me further into the basement. I descended the rotting, wooden steps. The walls were bare, made from raw concrete with exposed pipes running along them. I reached the bottom floor and found the piles of boxes we'd left down here when we moved in. Bits of old furniture and unloved family heirlooms were scattered among them. I gave it a once-over, but nothing seemed to be down here. Definitely not any member of the deer's extended family. I turned around and walked to the foot of the staircase. That's when I heard it. It was a low, creaking noise that froze me where I stood. I slowly turned back around and shone my flashlight at the source. The door to the old, mahogany closet that had been left to gather dust by the house's previous owners had opened, just a crack. I made my way towards it, my light illuminating the wooden behemoth. I stood just in front of it and grabbed the knob. With a shaking hand, I swung the doors wide open. I walked out of the basement and saw my wife leaning against a wall, looking at her phone and rubbing her eyes. She looked up and smiled weakly when I emerged. "Find anything?" she asked. I wordlessly handed the flashlight to her. "I think you should go down there and see for yourself," I told her without any emotion. She sighed, but took it and traced my path back down the old steps. As soon as she was in, I silently closed the basement door. I took the key that rested on the doorframe and locked it behind her. I rested against the now locked door and slid down it to the ground. I sat and whispered reassurances to myself that I was doing the right thing. I heard a clatter, then Angela started screaming. I covered my ears as she did. The noise was too much for me to bear. Then, the screeching that sounded like it was ripping through her throat stopped. I stayed where I was for another hour. Eventually, I stood and made my way to the bedroom. I lay in bed awake, paralyzed with fear. I closed my eyes when I heard footsteps on the staircase. I tried not to react when my wife climbed into bed beside me. When I did fall asleep, close to sunrise, I dreamt of what I saw in the closet. It looked like a skinned body, with its emaciated arms and legs stretched to the proportions of a sloppy children's drawing. Its head vaguely resembled deer, with the fur pulled back to reveal tight sinew covering bone. The thing's eyes were bulging and milk white. With its size, I had no idea how it could fit into that small deer's skin or my wife's. That was a few weeks ago now. Since that night, I feel like my life has improved dramatically. Angela hasn't argued with or belittled me in weeks. In fact, I haven't heard her speak in over a month. Sometimes she leaves for hours, even days at a time. I rest easy, though, now knowing for certain that she isn't seeing someone behind my back. At night, we lay motionless in bed together. I like to trace the seam running down her abdomen with my fingers when we do. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.